Welcome. Today we're doing something a little different. We're initiating what we're calling a discernment drop. The purpose here isn't to get bogged down in, the day-to-day debates. It's to pull the camera way, way back.
Right, to look at the foundations.
Exactly, to really clearly articulate some of these massive cultural and spiritual shifts that happened over decades.
Yeah.
Shifts that happened so subtly that, well, a whole generation, maybe even the faithful, just missed how the machinery actually worked.
And it's about this idea of an internal remapping. It's the stuff we consume passively. The things we watch or listen to without our critical filters up. That's what has the most profound influence on our moral imagination, our internal compass. So this drop today is really about how our instincts, not just our opinions, were fundamentally rewired.
And the central argument we're going to explore, which might be provocative for some, is this. The deep moral and societal reorientation in America. It didn't really start in government, or in the courts, or even in the universities. It started somewhere we really weren't looking. It started in the entertainment we invited right into our homes.
The movies, the music.
The sitcoms, the album covers, all of it.
Our analysis today is, it's drawn from the work of Pastor John L. Widdifield, specifically from The Symbolic Coup, Entertainment and Moral Collapse.
And we're going to be focusing really tightly on one section. It's titled The Serpent in the Silver Screen, How the 60s and 70s Rewired America.
And, throughout this, we'll probably just refer to him as Pastor John, but we're really unpacking his central claim, which is that this whole period, it was not some accidental cultural drift.
Not at all. The source material it's so compelling because it argues America was, and this is his word, systematically reprogrammed.
And that word is so important, reprogrammed.
It is. And crucially, this wasn't done through, dry intellectual arguments or some top-down government mandate. It was done through powerful stories, through symbols.
Because stories and symbols, they bypass our logic, don't they? They go straight to the soul.
Straight to the soul. That's where they implant intuition. And as Pastor John argues, if you really want to change a civilization, you don't start by changing the laws.
No, you capture the imagination first.
You capture the imagination first, the laws will follow.
So to really understand the power of what he calls this symbolic coup, we have to set the stage. We have to get our heads around why the 1960s and 70s were the perfect moment for this to happen.
Right.
Pastor John identifies this specific era as, and I'm quoting here, the most spiritually vulnerable moment in American history.
That's a huge claim.
It's a massive claim. And it wasn't just, general unrest. He says it was a unique convergence of 5 specific destabilizing factors that basically created a vacuum ready for a new program to be installed.
Okay, so let's unpack that. This perfect storm of vulnerability. Because, a healthy society, a society with a strong immune system, it naturally resists these kinds of radical ideologies, right?
Should, yes.
But Pastor John is suggesting that by the 60s, the body politic was already significantly weakened. It was susceptible.
The first factor he points to is, well, it's the erosion of the church's cultural authority.
Yeah.
And it's hard for us to imagine now, but for generations, the moral voice of the nation, even for people who didn't go to church.
It was still shaped by it.
It was heavily influenced by a broadly Judeo-Christian worldview. By the 60s, that assumption was just rapidly falling apart.
So the institution itself was being painted as what? Outdated. Rigid.
Outdated, rigid, disconnected from the real world. It was a very successful campaign. So the primary guardrail, the main defense against this kind of symbolic inversion, it was slipping away.
And that matters so much. If your moral anchor is dragging any new message, especially one about, self-expression or rebellion, it's going to find much less resistance. The soil was already tilled.
Precisely. Which leads to a second factor, the rapid destabilization of the family unit. Suddenly, critiques of the traditional nuclear family weren't just on the fringes of academia anymore.
No, they were mainstream.
They were in magazines, on talk shows. Divorce rates started to climb. And critically, the media narrative started painting the traditional family, especially, the suburbs and marriage,
as a trap.
As a source of neurosis, unhappiness, stagnation. You see, you can't successfully rewire a culture if you don't first neutralize its primary unit of cultural transmission, which is the family.
And that creates just profound personal confusion, disorientation, especially for young people who are being told that the very foundation of order is actually flawed.
The third factor is technological, and it's one we often overlook in this kind of analysis. The rise of television.
Yeah.
For the very first time in human history, an entire nation, spanning all these different regions and cultures, was consuming the exact same symbols.
The same story.
From the same handful of sources at the same time every single night. That level of centralized messaging, of unified perception.
Yeah.
That never existed.
So if your goal was to deliver a single, powerful, culture-shaping narrative, an emotionally charged message, to every household in the country, the 1970s gave you the first ever mechanism to do it, efficiently and repeatedly.
Absolutely. Which connects to the fourth point.
Yeah.
The consolidation of Hollywood studios and media companies. The actual gatekeepers deciding which symbols and stories got broadcast. There weren't many of them.
It was a small group.
A very small, concentrated group. You see the rise of these huge media conglomerates buying up independent studios. So control over the national imagination was increasingly in the hands of a few powerful people.
And then there's the big one, the one that requires us to be very careful and just report what the source says, the documented actions of the government itself.
Yes. The fifth factor Pastor John brings up is the fact that the U.S. government, through programs we now know about, like MKUltra, was actively researching and experimenting on the public. Psychedelic research, perception manipulation, psychological operations. This confirmed that these tools, these mechanisms for messing with identity and perception, they weren't just theory.
They were real. They were operational.
State actors were intensely studying them. And knowing that provides a frankly terrifying context for what was simultaneously starting to appear in the media.
So you put all five of those together. A weakening church, a destabilizing family, a centralized media delivery system, consolidated Hollywood power, and documented government research into mass psych warfare.
Right.
Pastor John's conclusion is that the nation was perfectly positioned for a rapid and very deep reprogramming. This wasn't a grassroots thing. It was the perfect environment for a structured symbolic invasion.
Which brings us right to part one, defining the actual strategy he claims was used. He has a specific name for it. He calls it symbolic inversion.
Okay, let's stop and define this, because this is the core of it all. Symbolic inversion. It's more than just saying what's right is wrong, what's wrong is right. It's deeper.
Much deeper.
It's the active flipping of a symbol's meaning, so that when you, the audience, see a symbol of, say, virtue, your immediate gut reaction is boredom or even disgust. And when you see a symbol of transgression, of rebellion, your internal reaction is curiosity. Attraction, glamour. It surgically alters the moral map your soul navigates by.
And the source is clear that this process, it completely bypasses the conscious logical mind.
Right.
A society is almost never overturned by someone just preaching against morality on a rational level. If I hand you a pamphlet that says chastity is restrictive, you'll probably just
throw it away.
You'll ignore it. But if I weave that same message into a story, a movie, where the chaste character is awkward and pitiable and just joyless.
And the promiscuous character is the one who's alive.
Exactly. They're joyful, authentic, the magnetic center of the whole story. Well, you've just successfully inverted the moral weight of those ideas. You've changed who the audience empathizes with.
And empathy is the psychological backdoor.
It's the backdoor. Absolutely. We subconsciously align ourselves with the hero of the story. So if the hero is always the self-expressive rebel who breaks every rule,
we internalize that lesson. That rebellion is the same thing as truth, as authenticity, as freedom.
So let's get concrete. Let's look at what Pastor John calls his inversion checklist. These are the specific, systematic flips he saw taking over in the 60s and 70s, all designed to rewire American intuition.
Let's start with the aesthetic one. That's always the easiest one to see first.
First one, evil becomes glamorous. Good becomes boring. Think about old movies. The villains were, they were villains.
They looked evil. They sounded evil.
Right. They were often ugly or monstrous or clearly separate from the normal, respectable world. The symbolic inversion takes the anti-hero, the criminal, the rogue, and dresses them in better clothes.
Gives them the cool car.
The cool car. The witty dialogue. And this is critical, a compelling, tragic backstory that sort of justifies their immorality.
Meanwhile, the good guy, the moral authority figure,
he's portrayed as boring, judgmental, hopelessly naive, a bit of a loser, frankly.
And this is so important. The audience doesn't just root against that boring character. You're being trained to root against the virtue that character represents.
The second inversion is more structural. The rebel becomes the hero. The authority figure becomes the villain. This fundamentally alters the social operating system. Authority in any form, a parent, a cop, a teacher, a pastor, is immediately suspect. It's automatically the villain.
It's portrayed as oppressive, hypocritical, something that's just standing in the way of the hero's happiness.
And the person who rejects that structure, even if they're destructive or totally irresponsible, they're lifted up. They're the ones speaking truth to power.
Which completely subverts the trust you need for any kind of, social order to function. Family, church, government. Once the uniform or the badge or the collar is automatically coded as villain, the whole foundation starts to crack.
Third, lust becomes liberation. Chastity becomes neurosis. We'll get into the specific movie examples in a bit, but the symbolic mechanism here is that desire, which was traditionally seen as this powerful force that needed to be governed.
Right, channeled.
It gets reframed as the ultimate expression of your true self. And any attempt to control it, whether through self-discipline or, the institution of marriage, is portrayed as psychological repression.
As a sickness.
A sickness, fear, something that's preventing you from being authentic.
Wow.
It's a profound shift from seeing self-control as a strength to seeing it as a psychological illness.
It's a total reversal.
Fourth, occult symbols become fashion statements. This is what he calls the aestheticization of darkness, a huge symbolic shift. Pastor John tracks how all this imagery, the pentagram, the serpent, tarot symbols, specific hand signs, they moved from being these esoteric warnings, symbols of real spiritual danger,
to being accessories, things you could buy at the mall.
Exactly. They become widely available, cool, they are defanged, the spiritual warning is sterilized, and they become an invitation instead.
They're edgy, they're fashionable, and they're an easy way for a young person to signal their rebellion against an establishment that, fears those symbols.
Fifth, Christianity becomes something you grow out of. The powerful symbols of faith, the cross, the church building, traditional moral codes, they get stripped of their meaning as the bedrock of the civilization.
And instead, they're portrayed as representing what? Intolerance.
Intolerance, ignorance, or just a kind of childish naivete. The smart, sophisticated, worldly character in the story is always the atheist, or the agnostic, or the one who's into Eastern mysticism.
Right, and the faithful character is the one who just hasn't seen enough of the world yet to know better.
And the final point is that all of this works together. By flipping these symbols over and over across all forms of media, you change the moral map. And the audience doesn't even realize they've been catechized.
Catechized. That's a powerful word.
It is, because if the symbols that used to signal good now make you feel bored or repulsed, and the symbols that signal evil now seem attractive and exciting, your soul has been reoriented. And it happened without you ever having a single philosophical debate. That's the coup.
So now we get into the concrete evidence, part 2. How is this actually executed? Let's look at the film, TV, and music. This is where you really see how Hollywood, as the source says, weaponized empathy.
Let's start with what he calls the anti-hero revolution, the intentional changing of what a hero even is.
Before this era, the hero in a movie, a cowboy, a soldier, whatever, was generally defined by a few key things, right? Self-control, honor,
sacrifice,
willingness to sacrifice your personal desires for a greater good. The new definition that popped up so fast in the late 60s just completely inverted that.
The new hero, the new protagonist, was the self-expressive one, the rebellious one, the lawless individual who decided their own truth and didn't care about any external moral or legal code.
And Pastor John's first big example of this is 1967's Bonnie and Clyde.
The quintessential example. In real life, Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow were, let's be blunt, they were violent, murderous bank robbers.
Right. Not glamorous people.
Not at all. But the film was a masterpiece of symbolic transformation. It put them in these fashionable, cool clothes, gave them this romantic, exciting musical score.
And it presented their crime spree not as, simple greed or violence, but as this stylish, spirited rebellion against the boring, bureaucratic establishment of the Depression era.
They made being a criminal alluring. They actively encouraged the audience to root for the stylish outlaws against the drab, slow, clumsy forces of law and order.
So the message isn't just crime is okay. It's something more subtle. It's if the system is oppressive, the only moral choice is to break it. And you'll look really good while you're doing it.
And right on its heels, you get 1969's Easy Rider. Here, the heroes are these counterculture wanderers. They're basically drifters, embracing a life of lawlessness and hedonism. But the film frames them immediately as prophets of truth. They're wandering through this corrupt, hypocritical America. The inversion is total. Purity is found by rejecting society. Society itself, the straight world, the cops, the small-town folks, is presented as rotten to the core, inherently violent.
So that movie, it really solidified this narrative that truth is only found on the outside, on the road, in this state of constant rebellion, rejecting stability, family, work. It was an incredibly powerful teaching tool for a generation looking for an identity outside of the old structures.
And that, just to push the audience's empathy to its absolute limit, you get Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange.
Which is the ultimate example of this.
It really is. It makes a hyper-violent sociopath, Alex, the sympathetic center of the story. The audacity of it is in the visual language.
Well, yeah, they're wearing...
Alex and his gang wear these clean white uniforms, a symbol of purity, while they're committing these brutal acts. He loves classical music, a symbol of high culture.
So you're associating depravity with sophistication.
Precisely. And the psychological masterstroke is that when the state finally captures Alex and subjects him to this condition, this Ludovico technique, the audience, even though we know what a monster he is, we root for him.
We root for him to keep his free will, even if that free will is just the freedom to rape and murder.
The film successfully argues that the biggest evil isn't individual violence, it's institutional control. Conformity, the film suggests, is a greater crime than chaos. Hollywood had successfully swapped out the definition of a hero. The moral defender was out, the depraved self-expressor was in, and that fundamentally reprogrammed the audience's emotional loyalties.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about how this strategy played out in the realm of relationships, the sexual revolution on film. Pastor John's claim here is that cinema wasn't just documenting changes, it was actively preaching a gospel of self-expression.
Right, he says it was basically the catechesis for a new religion.
And that phrase, new religion, is so precise because traditional Christian thought holds that sex is, powerful, sacred, and it needs boundaries. It needs the container of marriage to lead to human flourishing.
And this new cinematic religion systematically inverted that entire structure.
So what were the specific inversions that were applied here?
Well, first, boundaries became oppression. Any moral or structural limit to the idea of waiting for marriage, fidelity within marriage, even modesty, was portrayed as psychologically damaging.
Stifling.
The hallmark of an outdated society that's just clinging to shame and fear.
And with that, modesty became ignorance. The character who showed any kind of traditional reservation was always portrayed as unworldly, sheltered, or just naive. It made them instantly less appealing.
And crucially, marriage became bondage. The covenant that was meant to be a source of security and protection was redefined as a cage, an emotional, creative, and intellectual cage.
The enemy of true, spontaneous, liberated love.
You rarely saw a happy, stable marriage in the films of that era. You saw troubled ones, restrictive ones.
And on the flip side of that, promiscuity became truthfulness.
Exactly. The authentic character, the truly liberated one, was the one who followed their immediate desires, wherever they led, with no commitment. The ability to just pursue desire was equated with being honest with yourself.
So what are some of the films the source points to?
He points to films like Midnight Cowboy and Last Tango in Paris. And these were not subtle. They plunged the audience into these worlds where the old moral constraints were either gone or actively shown to be harmful to the characters.
So they were normalizing behaviors that had previously been considered transgressive.
Completely. They were validating them under the banner of art or intellectual honesty. It was all just new liberated cinema.
So this recoding of lust as a form of enlightenment was so successful that by the end of the 70s, the whole emotional language had shifted. If you held to the older moral standards, you weren't just seen as religious anymore.
No, you were seen as psychologically stunted, afraid of life, repressed. The symbolic coup had successfully managed to shame virtue.
Okay, finally, in this section on evidence, we have to look at how quickly the occult went mainstream. The speed with which these darker themes moved from being a total taboo to just mainstream curiosity, it's pretty stunning.
It is, and it's a testament to the power of what he calls aestheticization, making something palatable by making it look cool.
Historically, anything to do with witchcraft or Satanism was treated with, extreme caution, fear.
A profound spiritual warning. The 60s and 70s deliberately and systematically stripped all of that spiritual weight away.
How? What was the process?
The source lays out 3 distinct steps you see in mainstream media.
Step 1, making it cute.
Bewitched.
Exactly. You take witchcraft, which Pastor John asserts is a serious spiritual reality, and you turn it into a harmless domestic comedy. a suburban problem you can solve with a twitch of your nose. The spiritual danger is just dismissed as a fun party trick.
Okay, so after cute, what's step 2? Step 2, making it sophisticated. That's Rosemary's Baby. This film introduces Satanism not as some, grotesque cartoon, but as the secret hobby of wealthy, polite, successful, culturally elite New Yorkers. The evil is dressed in designer clothes. It makes the dark side seem intelligent, subtle, alluring.
A secret for the cool kids.
A secret for the culturally advanced. And then, step 3, making it thrilling. And that's the role of The Exorcist.
Now, some people would say that movie is a warning against evil.
And on one level, it is. But the sheer spectacle of it, the power, the mystery of this spiritual warfare, it captivated millions. It made the dark forces something to be fascinated by, intriguing, even thrilling, rather than something to be strictly avoided.
So once the occult is cute, sophisticated, and thrilling, the spiritual warning has basically been neutralized.
It's been silenced. And the music industry reinforced this on a massive scale. Pastor John points to the explosion of occult symbols on album covers.
Right, you see it everywhere.
Pentagrams, serpents, tarot cards, Eastern mysticism. It was all over the record store shelves. And the kids embraced it. Why? Because when occult symbols just become an aesthetic, they stop working as warnings.
They just become a uniform for rebellion. If the symbol looks cool and it freaks out your parents, it's instantly desirable.
The spiritual meaning is forgotten.
Yeah.
All that matters is the aesthetic and the rebellion. And the author's conclusion on this is, well, it's haunting. He says the devil didn't walk in the front door of the culture. He opened a boutique in the mall.
We're now moving into part 3, and this section of the source material challenges the entire origin story of the counterculture movement. We're shifting from analyzing the what the content to questioning the who and the how behind it, starting with what he calls the strangeness of Laurel Canyon.
And this is probably the most challenging claim. It requires us to be rigorously impartial here and just report on his structural critique.
Understood.
He flags what he sees as a remarkable geographical and sociological anomaly in the music scene.
And the anomaly is just how concentrated it was, right? Laurel Canyon is a very small, specific neighborhood overlooking Hollywood.
A tiny neighborhood. Yet, according to the source, almost every single major iconic counterculture band, the Doors, the Byrds, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Frank Zappa, the Mamas and Papas, they all came out of this one tiny, concentrated spot.
That level of talent, and more importantly, ideological alignment in one small place, it does raise questions about how organic the whole explosion really was.
But it's the second layer of the anomaly that really drives his critique, and that's the backgrounds of many of these key figures.
Okay.
The source asks a very pointed question. Why were so many of the leading voices of the anti-war revolution, the children of Pentagon elites, high-ranking military officers, or people with documented intelligence community backgrounds?
And that is the central point of cognitive dissonance, isn't it? If this movement was a truly spontaneous grassroots rebellion against the military-industrial complex,
Against the establishment.
why did its loudest and most effective voices seem to come from individuals who were deeply connected to the very structures they were supposedly rebelling against?
The source offers, well, a profoundly controversial conclusion. He argues that this suggests the counterculture wasn't counter at all, but that it was constructed.
Constructed.
And he suggests it followed the pattern of what are sometimes called color revolutions.
Okay, we need to be really clear here. When he uses that term, color revolution, in this context, what does he mean by it? We're just reporting his definition.
Right. In political science, it can refer to a popular uprising, sometimes one that seems spontaneous, that leads to regime change. But in the specific context Pastor John uses it, he's referring to the theory that these movements are often strategically manufactured, maybe guided from the outside, but designed to look like a spontaneous revolt.
In order to achieve a specific strategic goal.
Exactly. And in this case, the goal, he argues, was a massive social and moral inversion.
The implication of that, for the listener, is just staggering. If the biggest movement of symbolic and moral inversion in modern American history wasn't an accident, wasn't a spontaneous youth movement, but a manufactured cultural product,
then the whole shift was intentional from the start.
Yeah.
Designed to have maximum impact and to bypass any natural resistance.
This then brings us to the connection that Pastor John argues most people miss completely. The link between this potentially constructed counterculture and the documented operational goals of programs like MKUltra.
We have to remember what MKUltra was really about. Beyond the sensational stuff about LSD. The source argues its true focus was suggestion, perception manipulation, identity disorientation, behavioral influence,
and symbolic messaging.
symbolic messaging. In short, controlling the structure of the mind.
So let's unpack that. What does a term like identity disorientation even mean in the context of psychological warfare?
It means intentionally introducing confusion about who you are, what your social role is, where your moral anchors are, and media that constantly promote self-questioning and the rejection of your inherited identity is a perfect tool for that kind of disorientation.
And the source actually lists specific techniques that were studied by MKUltra that he claims showed up almost identically in the media of this period.
Let's walk through them. First, sensory overload. Intelligence agencies knew that if you flood the senses, you disrupt a person's ability to think rationally.
Like the shift in rock music.
Exactly. The sudden shift to loud, chaotic, dissonant music. And in film, you see the rise of rapid, jarring, nonlinear editing, that pace and volume. It's designed to bypass linear thought and go straight for emotional imprinting.
So the goal isn't just to entertain, it's to structurally dislodge your rational defenses.
Second, psychedelic reinforcement. The drug culture was everywhere, but more than that, it was visually and musically integrated into the art itself.
The aesthetics of it.
The colors, the patterns, the whole philosophical idea that you have to break down your consciousness to find a higher truth. This directly supported the new religion of self-expression and inversion. It made the altered state aspirational.
Third, narrative dislocation.
This is about breaking traditional storytelling, making the audience constantly question what's real, who's who, what the moral center is. We saw that in A Clockwork Orange. The media stops providing a clear, stable, moral anchor, and it forces the audience into a state of chronic moral ambiguity.
Which perfectly mirrors the goal of identity disorientation.
Fourth is a concept called trauma bonding. This one's crucial. Media that creates a shared, intense emotional experience, often through shocking, violent, or sexually charged content.
Like The Exorcist or Last Tango in Paris.
Yes, that shared intensity. It binds the audience to the message and to the messenger. That emotional jolt creates a powerful, lasting imprint that rational arguments can't easily undo later.
And the last one on his list is music-driven emotional imprinting.
Music is the perfect vehicle for this. It accesses our emotions and memory more directly than almost anything.
Yeah.
And so it was used to encode these messages. Rebellion, rejection of authority, symbolic inversion, deep into the subconscious of a generation.
So, to be clear, Pastor John's claim is complex. He's not saying every movie director was a CIA agent.
No, not at all. He's arguing that Hollywood simply adopted and mastered the exact same methods of perception manipulation that intelligence agencies were studying and perfecting, methods to control narratives and behavioral outcomes.
In his words, Hollywood and Langley were drinking from the same well.
A well of psychological control techniques.
And that interpretation suggests that whether the counterculture was a complete fabrication or just something that was cleverly exploited, the techniques used to amplify its message were sophisticated, highly effective, and designed for deep-level ideological change.
And by the end of the 1970s, Pastor John asserts that America had undergone what he calls a psychological exorcism. It's a powerful phrase he uses to describe how this systematic symbolic inversion had successfully rewritten the nation's spiritual instincts.
So this is the synthesis, part 4, where we look at the results. And we need to be really clear about the before and after comparison the source provides. The nation's instincts before this coup and after.
Okay, let's look at the moral ideal. Before this era, the general cultural instinct was that virtue was aspirational.
Right. Even if people failed, the ideal was still held up as the goal.
Exactly. Failure was seen as failure. After the inversion, vice was exciting. It was the source of the thrill, the edge. It was the source of vitality and authenticity.
That's a profound shift. From aspiring to transcendence to celebrating transgression.
It is. Now, look at religion. Before this era, Christianity was broadly seen as a stabilizing force, even if it was complicated for some. It provided the moral and legal framework for the country. After the inversion, Christianity was systematically depicted as repressive. It was framed as the chief obstacle to human freedom and the full expression of the self.
What about society and government?
Before, authority was respected, or at least the institutions of authority were given the benefit of the doubt that a civil society needs to function. After the inversion, authority was corrupt. Every leader, political, religious, or in the family, was instantly presumed to be guilty, hypocritical, or actively harmful.
And the family itself was inverted. Before, marriage was the assumed goal, the default setting for a healthy adult life, the engine of the community.
After, marriage was optional. And it was often portrayed as this tedious, antagonistic choice that just restricted your personal fulfillment.
And Pastor John really emphasizes one of the most powerful and subtle inversions in media, especially sitcoms, the view of fatherhood.
This is a huge one. Before fatherhood was honored, the father was the protector, the provider, respected as the head of the house. After, fatherhood was comedic.
The bumbling dad.
The dad became the butt of every joke. He was clueless, out of touch, just a bumbling obstacle to his kids, who were always wiser and happier than he was.
And that's a potent symbolic weapon, because if you make the foundational authority figure in the family look ridiculous, you make the very concept of order and benevolent authority seem laughable.
So the source's conclusion is that this huge shift was not random. It wasn't cultural drift. It was a deliberate, systematic, symbolic inversion. And once a society's deep instincts are inverted, the laws and the formal institutions have no choice but to follow.
Which leads us into Pastor John's theological framing. This is what provides the moral context for his entire analysis, and it's centered on that ancient warning in the book of Isaiah.
Yes, Isaiah 5:20. The passage is incredibly direct. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil.
And he frames this not just as, a poetic warning against being immoral.
No, he says it's a literal technical description of the exact phenomenon of symbolic inversion. When the symbols for good and evil are systematically flipped in the public mind, the moral confusion that results is precisely what the prophet was warning about.
The source argues that there's really nothing new under the sun here. The adversary just perfects a few key strategies, and the most successful one is always to make the darkness look beautiful and exciting and alluring,
while making the light look dull and restrictive and painful.
And that activates our natural human tendency towards rebellion, and then our own hearts do the rest of the work.
Which is why Pastor John makes this profound assertion that the entertainment of the 60s and 70s, it wasn't just entertainment. He says it was catechesis.
Catechesis, that's a serious religious term. It means systematic instruction in doctrine, teaching.
It is. He argues America wasn't just being entertained. It was being systematically discipled into a whole new religious worldview. The religion of self, rebellion, and inversion.
Entertainment became the primary source of moral instruction for a generation.
It usurped the traditional teaching roles of the church and the family. And because this instruction was packaged in these highly emotional, fun, aesthetically pleasing stories, it was exponentially more effective than any Sunday school lesson could ever be.
So the ultimate framing here is that the battle was for the soul of the nation. And it wasn't fought in the Senate, it was fought on the screen.
Yeah. So come to the payoff, part 5. Why does this deep historical analysis of symbolic inversion from 50 years ago matter so intensely right now?
Because, as Pastor John makes crystal clear, the battles we are facing today, these intense conflicts over gender, sexuality, identity, even the nature of truth itself, they didn't just start recently with the internet.
No.
They began when an entire generation learned to feel fundamentally differently about morality than their parents did, thanks to the groundwork laid by that symbolic coup.
He lays out a clear and, frankly, devastating sequence, the mechanism of civilizational collapse. First, he says, the inversion of instinct always comes before the inversion of ethics. Once your gut-level feelings tell you that authority is always suspect and boundaries are always oppression, your rational ethical system will eventually twist itself to justify those feelings.
And the inversion of ethics, then, always comes before the inversion of law.
Always. Once the new ethic is established, that self-expression is the highest possible good. For instance, society starts to demand that the legal system reflect that new morality. Old laws suddenly seem unjust, and what was once wrong must now be legally protected.
And finally, the inversion of law precedes the inversion of civilization itself.
When the foundation of shared moral beliefs is gone, and the laws are just based on self-interest or passing feelings instead of transcendent truth, civilization begins to fracture.
So this framing suggests that what we're watching play out today isn't some new crisis. It's the final, predictable act of a play that was written 50 years ago.
America didn't just fall off a cliff. It followed a script written in the 60s and directed in the 70s. We are living in the logical conclusion of that initial symbolic coup.
So what is the necessary response? According to Pastor John, it can't be panic, and it can't be some impossible retreat to the 1950s.
The required response is intentional, active discernment. It's a call to the remnant to become culturally and spiritually literate.
So what does that look like, practically? The first step, he says, is to name the spirits behind the symbols.
Which means we have to stop seeing media as just neutral entertainment. We have to actively recognize the intentional ideological message baked into it. We have to ask, what instinct is this story trying to plant in me? What traditional symbol is it trying to invert?
This means we have to actively teach the next generation and maybe reteach ourselves how stories work, how symbols form our instincts, how culture subtly manipulates our conscience through emotional imprinting.
The next generation needs a cultural immune system that is strong enough to spot symbolic inversion in real time, whether it's in a movie, a song, or some new digital trend.
It's about pairing spiritual literacy with media literacy, recognizing that the symbols on the screen are not neutral. They are charged vessels of a worldview, and they are in a constant battle for your inner compass.
And the final call to action is to reclaim the imagination. If the coup began by capturing the imagination with these inverted destructive symbols, then the only counter-response is to intentionally fill our imaginations and our children's imaginations with truth and beauty, and with symbols that affirm the right order of creation, what the ancient church called the Logos.
Because Pastor John ends with a statement of profound hope. A truth that puts this whole fight into context. Despite the power of Hollywood, despite MKUltra, despite the spirit of the age, the light is still stronger.
The light has not been defeated. The Logos is Christ. And this entire massive symbolic coup was necessary in the first place precisely because the enemy had to rewire an entire generation just to get them to ignore the unshakable truth that still anchors reality.
That's the ultimate context for this battle. It is still and always will be a battle for the soul. And it's fought not primarily through political debate, but through the profound, subtle power of symbols and stories. We hope this discernment drop has helped provide some clarity to see the script for what it is.
The stakes are simple. Whoever controls the imagination controls the future. So if we look at the narratives and symbols shaping the instincts of the current generation, the constant focus on identity fragmentation, the glorification of fleeting sensation, the endless digital noise, we have to ask ourselves, how can we apply this historical lesson of discernment today to protect and reclaim the most vulnerable ground there is, the imagination?